Okay, hello everyone, and welcome back to the workshop that we've been hosting about the Q community. We didn't get a chance to go through everything on, when was it? Tuesday this week? Was it Monday? Monday, I think, yes. So what I want to do today is go through a couple of outstanding things that I was really keen to share and just make sure we all have a full understanding of the topics covered here. So I'm going to do the usual, quickly share my screen, and then we'll get into it. Hopefully you see the full screen this time. So what we didn't cover was how to create good content that people actually want to see in an online community. What tends to happen is a lot of people use a community as a notice board, and they dump all the content from elsewhere onto the community and hope that someone will see it or more people will read it. And this just persuades people, honestly, not to browse through it, not to see it at all. So what we want to do is change how we think about content in the community. And one way of thinking about this is, what would a community newspaper look like? If you think about the local newspaper for whatever area or region that you're in, what does it feature? And what's in it? What you're probably thinking about, or hopefully what you're thinking about, is content for a local community is about the people in that community. And that's fundamentally what people want to read. People want to read content about themselves and people like themselves. And we're not going to embrace entirely that idea, but we are going to take the key elements on it, from it, and then figure out how we develop content from that. So the old way was very much a self-centered approach. If you have a knowledge base at the moment, this is usually how it works. You publish what you want to share and hope that members find that is useful. You don't let anyone see it until the content is finished. You write the entire article yourself, and then you publish a knowledge article and you move on to the next thing. The community approach. The community approach is a lot different. First, you ask members what content they find useful, and you make sure you're covering those topics. It begins with that member in mind. It begins with the audience in mind. If you can do interviews, if you can do surveys, you can get a huge amount of great content really, really fast. Second, you can gather feedback from members during the process of developing whatever content or resource you're creating. The great thing about this is that the more people who are involved in creating the content, the more likely they are to share it. And this can increase the level of engagement and the number of members in your community significantly just by involving people in that process. Third is that it's member driven. You can start discussions about the topic, proactively solicit contributions, and make sure that the article features the best contributions of everyone. You don't have to write the entire article yourself. You can ask 5 or 10 people in your community what do they think about an issue and write up the findings of that. You'll notice that local newspapers, or all newspapers, tend to do this. They interview experts in that space and then they write up the findings of that. That's a very community-driven approach to this. And finally, it's member-owned. What I mean by that is that traditionally, you'd publish an article and that was it. It was done. It would live there forever and you would never engage in that again. But the community way is that you invite members to frequently update the article, suggest edits and improve it. Make sure there's comments where people can take a greater sense of ownership. Maybe afterwards you want to put someone in charge of keeping that content up to date. And that's what we mean by the old way and the community way. And if you want more engagement, you have to begin with things that are engaging. And publishing static content on the web, that's great if you want to build an audience. But if you want engagement, if you want people participating, we have to take this community-led approach. Second is to think about the format that we're using. There's many different ways to do contents and many different ways to think about how we do this. Some content has a very niche or niche appeal. Some of it has wide appeal, some is at the beginner level, and some is at the advanced level. And the key challenge for you is to figure out who's it's targeting and why. Tactical guides, expert roundups, how-to advice stuff, that usually has a niche appeal at the beginning level, and that can be quite useful to start with. If you want a wider appeal, then usually you want introductory guides, industry news, maybe surveys of the sector, statistical research, but figure out what level you're targeting your content at. A good thing to think about here is how long has the majority of your audience been engaged in that topic? If they're relatively new, then obviously having lots of beginner level content is good. If they've been around for a long time, then you might want to change it. But it really is a good idea to think about what level you're targeting at and make sure that you're satisfying all of the unique needs and just figure out which of these make the most sense to you. Next is that the headline matters a lot. People don't read content that they don't find engaging. And we have to think about how we're going to make sure that the content that we create is engaging. And that's why we have to think about what is the approach? How are we going to position this? Is it a novelty approach? Is it belief reinforcement, where we're sharing something that people already believe, so they're more likely to share it? Is it relationship, where people know you and you're writing for people that you know? Is there an element of a perceived threat or fear that you can play upon? Is there an element of surprise? But the headline has to reflect one of these things, the things that you're going to think is most impactful for the people that you're trying to reach. And then when you share it, make sure you're sharing it in a format that makes sense. There's so many different platforms that make sense, but honestly, if you just post an item of content in a community and hope that people read that, it's not going to work. Someone we've been working with for a couple of years is Nafa Romero at US Pharmacopoeia. And he makes, honestly, the dullest content that's out there today seem really interesting. And he does that by using tools like Canva and elsewhere, but it promotes the discussions outside of the community on LinkedIn and other channels and brings more people into the community. It's also a good idea to have models and frameworks that people can use. Like this was, I think, one of the most popular things I've posted in the past. Again, you'll notice that right at the beginning here, there's that belief reinforcement. I've deliberately picked a way to reinforce the belief that people have. So if you're an experienced professional, you're more likely to share this. I've targeted the people that are most likely to share it, and then I've created an easy means for them to do that. But having templates is good. Having a way of reinforcing that belief is even better. A couple of other things when we think about what a community manager actually does. We covered a lot of this already, but it really does depend upon what type of community you're building. Like how you'll spend your time will differ tremendously. And if you want more information on that, you can definitely get the book that's just behind me here, Build Your Community. And just be aware that your primary goal is to create an environment in which your members are going to help each other achieve their goals. All the facilitation activities that you do, if you want to drive activity in a community, there's typically tasks that we would recommend you do once a day, tasks that we recommend you do once a week, and tasks that maybe you want to do once a month, but this is only if you're working in a professional capacity. Like if you're being paid to manage a community, this makes sense. But otherwise, you can just do with the once a day and once a week tasks. Once a day is to be initiating and responding to discussions. Like especially in the early phases, you've got to really drive activity in a community. Usually have to be doing outreach and getting responses to activity, removing the bad stuff and welcoming and engaging newcomers in that group. These kind of things are tremendously powerful. The once a week activities are content and events are the primary ones. I don't think you need to do the rest at this point, but just focus on good content and events. And even if you just do these couple of things, the discussions, the outreach, the welcomes, the content, and the events, if you do those things, those 5 things incredibly well, you're going to be doing fine. Like, trust me, you'll be having a good level of engagement, good level of activity. Anything else you can add on top later on if you want, but just get the fundamentals that we've covered in these workshops in place. Obviously, I'm not going to ask a question because there's nobody here. The final thing I will mention is just think about also what pathway to influence makes sense. If you're building or managing any sort of group, then you've got to figure out how you're going to have influence over that group. And you've got to pick a channel that makes sense to you. And there's many different ones that work. Some people take a expert approach. That'd be the best way of describing it, or teacher approach, perhaps. This is where you create content that people want. You make it persuasive. You distribute it to an audience, and it gets shared by the audience. This is what I do, how I manage a community. I know what my personality is. I know what I'm good at. I know what I'm bad at. So I take that approach because I think that gives me a certain level of authority and influence over the people I want to reach. Other people take more of a connector-based approach, where they work with a small group of top members in that community. They solicit and curate the work from others. They host events and activities, and they're very much about engaging one-to-one at that level. And other people just had this unique personality where people just are drawn to them. They're very good at building relationships. They're very good at being friendly and optimistic. Just had that personality that people want to associate themselves with. So the final thing I think about to wrap this workshop is figure out which of these three approaches make sense. And I know some people are like, well, I'm going to do all three. Yes, you can try, but you probably won't end up doing any of them especially well. So I'd figure out which way makes the most sense to you. Anyway, that wraps up the additional video we've done. I know it's been like 160 slides or so, so thank you so much for watching. I really hope the workshop was useful for you. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to me on richard@feverbee.com. And there's also a copy of the book as well. You can find that in the previous video, or again, reach out to me and I'll give you a free copy of my book. That's richard@feverbee.com. Thank you so much, everyone. And hopefully I wish you, well, I do wish you the best of luck with building your community. And again, any questions, just feel free to drop me a line. Good luck.